Time for another release update video, and this time we're talking about 2018.12. It's been a little bit of time since 11 came out. We haven't slowed down the number of changes, we've just slowed down the release cycle for a couple of reasons. I wanted to do a quick run through of the major changes that are in 12 because some of them are reasonably significant. I'll start with the setup tab. There's a couple of changes here. One you won't really notice, but the DDP output has been here for a while. And basically it's a very, very low overhead protocol, although there's very few controllers that understand them. The biggest these days is FPP version 2, where Dan went over there and added support for the DDP protocol. It's substantially more efficient than the E131 protocol because the E131 protocol sends 512 bytes or up to 512 channels worth of data, but adds 126 bytes of overheads in the header structures. Whereas the DDP protocol only has 10 bytes of overhead, and the size of the packet is actually just over 1500 bytes. So for a lot fewer network packets, a lot more data gets transferred around, and hence it becomes very efficient. None of the standard controllers that you get, the Stand devices or the Falcons or anything, support the DDP protocol. So it's really only good for things like FPP. And if you're like me and you write your own controller code, I support DDP as well because it is so low overhead. But the change that's in this release is when you do an upload. Dan's had the upload to the FPP capes and hats for a little while. Well, now these things will actually support the use of the DDP protocol. So when you do the upload to FPP, if you've defined the DDP protocol here and you've sent it to the FPP, it will now do that configuration for you. So that's the minor change on this tab. The big change on this tab is up here, where we no longer have the separate media and show directory. You've just got the show directory, and the change button here will change that show directory. We haven't got rid of the media directory, but instead what Scott's introduced is this subfolders dialog, and this lets you actually control the locations of a whole bunch of different files. By default, they're all set up to use the show folder, but if you wanted to change the media directory to a different folder, you would unclick this checkbox here and you would go and select the appropriate folder. But even cooler for those that like to use things like Dropbox and the like, and have been killed by the fact that Dropbox has to upload all those FSCQ files and the backup folder as well, you can now specify an alternate location for the FSCQ files, which can be outside of your show folder. And that way you keep your show folder in Dropbox and you keep your FSCQs. And if you want your backups outside of your Dropbox, so your Dropbox is now only uploading the content that it really, really needs to have, remembering that obviously you can regenerate the FSCQ at any time on any of the machines that you happen to use that Dropbox with. So I imagine that's going to be reasonably popular with some folks. Now, you will need to, if you're using xSchedule, you will need to obviously repoint all of your schedules to the new folder with the new FSCQs. That won't happen automatically. You will need to go in and do that. You can also specify your alternative backup directory here. For those that don't know about that, there is the ability to press the F11 key, and that will do an alternate backup. So you've got these two backups. One backs up to the default backup location and one to an alternate. And the idea there was you'd set your alternate to be a USB stick or something, and it would write it to a different place when you pressed F11 or you select this menu item. So they're the two changes there. I imagine Scott's change in particular is going to be quite popular with some people because it's been asked for numerous times. So moving on to the layout tab, what's changed on the layout tab? A couple of things. So Dan's introduced a new type of pixel support. The support at the moment's a little bit limited, but basically down here, you can now select 4-channel RGB nodes, so RGBW, and obviously it supports the Ws in a number of different places, which does blow out the number of node types that we support, just because of all the different combinations we have to support. So if you're using one of the still fairly rare but 4-channel strips, that support is now built in here. And if you do select this, you also get to choose down here the behavior around how the RGB turns into white. So you have the option to say, just use the RGB, which would ignore the white channel entirely. Just use the white only. I think that just makes the strip white. I think it probably just ignores the RGB elements. But the R equals G equals B leads to white is basically what happens in that mode, which is the current default mode for how we handle just a single channel RGBW node, is if the R and the G and the B are all equivalent, then instead of turning the R, G and B on, we will actually suppress the RGB data and just write that equivalent value to the white channel. And that way you get a purer white output. So yeah, like I said, it's early days here. There are a bunch of places where we are inconsistent in the way we support this, and that will no doubt get better over time as we slowly dig them up. If you find an area where it doesn't work the way you would expect it to and you want to raise it, please do so, and we'll have a look and see if there's something we can do. There's going to be some wrinkles, I can bet on it. All right, so that's the first two, and submodel buffers. Okay, so there's a couple of changes that I did squeak into this release. Let me create a new matrix here to demo this. There are many more changes coming to submodels that will give you some additional capabilities. Let's create a very simple one here. It's just a 10 by 10 matrix, and let's go in and do some submodeling. I always love the way it does that. So let's add a submodel, doesn't matter what we call it. Now, historically, if I'd wanted to submodel this to create a cross, you know, I would have added a bunch of rows, in this case 10. And notice that the top and the bottom lines are now labeled. Now this will change in 13. I'm actually going to reverse these around so the top's at the top and the bottom's on the bottom. So on the bottom, which is the middle pixel, is going to be pixel 5. Let's imagine I'm trying to do a cross. So I'm going to make this 5, 15, 25, 35, 45. And then I'm going to do 51 to 60, which is the cross. And then we're going to do 65, 75, 85 and 95. And so as I skip up through that, you can see that I've made a cross. Now, one of the things that some people don't always appreciate about this, if I save that and I go and generate a sequence, and let me go to my matrix. It was my first matrix, I think. No, it wasn't my first matrix. Oh, it was my new one, wasn't it? Sorry, matrix 3, there it is. There's my model. So let's go and drop a single line on it and see what happens when we do a sweep across. Notice how it doesn't really light up like a cross. And the reason that happens is because the submodel is created with all of the lines pushed over to the left. So when the first pixel over here on this line lights up, the vertical line lights up because everything is being pushed over to the left-hand side in the buffer that sits behind that submodel. So the change that we've made in this release is we've allowed you to actually force the pixel to be moved across. And the way we do that, in this case, is we put 4 commas in it, in the front of it. And it doesn't change the pixels that are included in the model, but what it does is it changes the way the buffer behind it is constructed and puts the pixels in exactly the same position that they would be in if this was a custom model or something. I think I got that right. I will caution you in this release, if you reverse the nodes, you may well lose the commas. So I wouldn't do that in this release. That will be fixed in 13. It's just in a separate branch. So it hasn't come out yet in this release because we're still testing it. So now if I click on it and re-render it, you can see that it's now re-rendering very differently. Now what happens is as the single strand effect goes across, it actually lights this entire strand up at exactly the right place that you'd like. And that's because the buffer that sits behind that submodel is now actually got the pixels in all the right places. So I think that will actually create some greater capabilities with submodels and make it much easier to generate submodels that actually take selected pixels out of a matrix, etc., and turn that into another model which you can then sequence. Hopefully that works for folks. All right, so that's the changes to the layout tab. On the sequence tab, there's a couple of things that have changed here. One is, and I've got to find it. Where's Meteors? Is that Meteors? That's Meteors. Meteors, for some reason, and no doubt it's historical. If we can get that to dock there. We didn't have value curves on a lot of these settings, so these things now all have value curves. For those of you unfamiliar with value curves, I suggest you go and look up some videos on them. They give you an enormous amount of control over these settings. That's going to be pretty useful. And also on the snowflakes effect, there are value curves as well. The only thing to realize is these value curves only work when you're doing falling snow. They don't work with driving snow, and the reason for that is due to the way in which the driving algorithms implemented it really wasn't possible to change things. But if you're doing falling snow, you can now change how fast the snow falls over time. And things like that. So a couple of little value curve enhancements that, to be honest, I don't know why they weren't there already. Adding the ability to drop images and videos. So we've always been able to add video, and you would come up here and you drop a video onto something, and then you go over here and you go and browse and select the video file. But if you happen to have a folder here, if I can find my videos folder, where's my videos folder? There's my videos folder. I've got a bunch of videos in here. What you can now do is you can actually come over here to your videos and just drag and drop your videos onto your grid, and it will drop a video effect automatically, hook it up to the right video. It'll default to just a second long, so you'll still need to play with it and get it right, but that's a lot easier to do. There is a similar capability. If I can find my pictures folder, images folder. So I can do a similar thing here with an image like my Santa Claus. I can just drag and drop him on, and it created a picture effect. Again, I'll still need to come in here and tune the settings. I'm probably going to want to scale him to fit. Well, actually, I'm not sure I do. Maybe I want to keep his aspect ratio. Anyway, but yeah, you can now drag and drop them. You can do gladiator files, movie files, and picture files, and they will create the appropriate effect automatically and make it easier to sequence. Rework canvas blend style. Oh my God. Okay. So canvas blend is a somewhat advanced topic, but let me show you some things. So canvas blend style was introduced in 2018.11, and I introduced the concept of using an off effect and setting the transparent mode and the ability to selectively select the layers that are included. And I'm not going to go through all of that again. Go back and find those videos if you'd like to see that in action. But previously, the way it would work is canvas blend mode was down at the bottom of this list here, and you would choose that. What it was effectively doing, it was applying a canvas, and then it was doing an effect one. So it was forcing that to override everything below it after it had taken the data and manipulated it. And I get that's really vague, and I'm sorry for that, but this video is not meant to be a really in-depth exploration. But what I have done is I've now brought it out. It's now just a checkbox that you would put in place. And this allows you to actually, let me just quickly change that to a revolution. So this lets me actually combine the canvas with the other blend modes. So I can shadow 1 on 2, shadow 1 on 2, maybe shadow 2 on 1. Not sure that is what I want. Maybe additive. Okay. So now I can do things like use the additional blend styles to go with the canvas, which gives you, again, a whole bunch more options. I'm sure Kevin will again show us some great things that you can do with this. This is one of those things that I think I'll spend a bit of time on at the expo. And help people get an understanding of exactly what the canvas blend style is doing, because it's a little bit mind-bending, but until you really understand how xLights does the rendering behind the scenes, it's very difficult to explain, so I apologize. So I'm going to move on. All right, add the ability to save and load face mappings. There's probably less than a dozen of you that use this feature, but some time ago we created this generate lyrics from data capability. This allows you to take something like an LOR old sequence file that had some old singing faces using no data, and reverse engineer at least the phonemes for the lyric track from that data. And there's a video out there that explains exactly how to go about doing that. The problem was you had to go and set it all up, import your sequence, and that was fine. But then when you wanted to do the next sequence, even if all the data was exactly the same, you had to go back and re-enter all the data here. So now I've added the ability here for you to save and load those mappings. So if you've got, a couple of dozen of those sequences with singing faces, you can set the mapping up once, save it, and then as you convert each one, you just load the mapping back in. So it should save you a little bit of time. That's what that one's all about. Add lyric track and sequence download. Okay, so this is a really premature feature, and there's a couple of things you need to know about this. I see this as being particularly used with the lyric track project, and just helping people to distribute that content. Now there's two ways in this works, and it's all based on a common element. So first of all, let me go and create a song. Discard changes. If we're in the right folder. Yeah, I need to go to my show folder. My lights. I've only set this up for a couple of songs, so I've got to be very selective about which song I use. I think it's Christmas Every Day. I think that's the one. All right, so there's a couple of things here. Now, on the Info Media tab, there is now this hash fingerprint. So this is basically a unique fingerprint that stamps that particular audio file and uniquely identifies it. This is going to be the sort of the unique index key that we use for things like the lyric tracks, and potentially for sequences, etc., that associates that sequence or that lyric track with that specific music file, so that you know when you get that lyric track that it's going to match the particular music file that you've got. And although, because there may be multiple versions of that particular song, and you don't want to get a lyric track and find out that it's the wrong one. And so this is the unique ID that's going to match it. And so now there's this button here called Download Sequences and Lyrics. And what this is going to do is it's going to reach out over the internet to Sean's website, where we have stored an index file, and at the moment it's got two things in it, and we're working hard behind the scenes to start populating this. And in this case, and I'm not sure Bill actually created this, but he uploaded it to the Google Drive, so it's shown there. And what it's done is it's gone and found this song, and using this fingerprint, it's worked out that there's a set of lyrics out there that appear to be associated with this particular file. And now what you've got is you've got some links down here. So you've got the purchase music link, and if you click that, it's going to open up your browser, and it's going to take you to Amazon, to where that exact music track is. And there's a download link, and if you click the download link, it's going to go to your browser, and it's going to go to the Google Drive in this particular instance, and it's going to download that particular lyric track file off the Google Drive into your downloads folder. You're still going to have to go and manually import the lyric track in, just like you would have done if you'd gone to the Google Drive manually. But what it's done is it's helped you find that lyric track, and it's only showing you the lyric track that happens to be relevant to this particular song. Now, if there were multiple lyric tracks, they would appear here as multiple, and you'd be able to go through them. They could also come from different locations. This one here happens to be the Google Drive. We will be setting up another tree element here, which will be the singing, the lyric track downloads from the lyric track group. They'll be subject to the restrictions around downloading, as you would expect, because that was the conditions of the project. So you will still need to be a member of that group to actually do the download, but this will help you find the lyric track that's associated with your song, which hopefully will make things a lot better for you. You can also browse the whole repository. So even before you've got the song, if you want to, you can come up to here and select the download sequences and lyrics, and it will bring up the same dialogue, but this time slightly differently structured, because here, once again, you have the Google Drive, you would have the lyric track project and so forth, and then within certain categories, you can see that those same elements are there. Here's a sequence that Jonathan put together for your welcome. Again, if I click that download link, it's going to go and download that. If there was a video of this sequence on someone's house, we can put a video link in here. There's a whole bunch of stuff that can happen on here. And John De La Planche has he's kindly offered to at least go and index this Google Drive for us and help us build out this index so that you can more easily find that material and download it. So we're hoping that makes everyone's life easier, particularly our new users who want to see some examples. All right, keeping going. The random value curve setting. Okay, so let's go on. I don't know. This is going to look ugly, but we don't care. Help if we didn't have a rotor zoom on that. We just had a regular. Okay, so let's imagine that our movement, we wanted to put a value curve on it. So historically, we've had a whole bunch of predefined value curves. There's now a new one here called random. And what random will do is it will randomly construct you a value curve. You can choose what the minimum and the maximum is of those value curves. So you know, what's the smallest value it can be and what's the highest value it can be. You can also choose the number of points that appear inside the value curve. So you can generate quite interesting ones. Now, the downside of this, and if you watch very carefully just here to see the shape of the value curve, every time I click on the effect, that changes. And the reason is because it keeps on reapplying the randomness. If you don't want that after you've generated it, you look at that and say, actually, yeah, that's pretty good. I want to lock that in so it doesn't change again. You just come up to here and turn it into a custom. And at that point in time, everything gets locked in place. And no matter how many times you click on it, that random curve that got applied will stay there forever. So it's just a way to generate a truly random curve without having to go and click and drag and put stuff all over the place. That's it. There's one bug I want to talk about. Some of you may have used the auto custom model process. This is where you point a video camera at your prop. You go to the tools menu. Says getting the video. You go up to here to the generate custom model. You'd go through and you'd run this capture pattern. You'd video your prop. The lights would light up. At the end of it all, you would come to the process tab and you would process the video, and this will watch the video, and it will, you know, to a certain extent, generate a model based on that video, and depending on the conditions of the videos taken in, it does a pretty good job. The problem with that process is there was actually a couple of defects in it which would occasionally cause it to miss nodes and drop them, and you'd end up with these gaps in your numbering and you'd have to go and fix it up. Well, I've gone in and fixed those bugs. So I think you will find that that auto custom model generation will do a much better job than it historically has. And you can be a little bit more aggressive in some of your settings to try and get a better result. So I reprocessed some pretty poor video and got some pretty stunning results out of it. So I'm pretty happy with that bug fix. I don't normally talk about bug fixes in these videos, but that made a big difference. The Jukebox feature, I spoke about it in a dedicated video, but just quickly, there's now this view Windows Jukebox. which brings up a panel of buttons. You can wire these buttons up so that they point at a particular effect, and when you click on the button, that effect will start playing. It's great for people that are looking to use xLights effects in a live show, and they want to be able to set up a bunch of cues, which is what these buttons are, and when they click on the cue, that effect starts to play, and when they click on a red one, it would stop, like that. And so, yeah, it can be a really cool way to actually drive lights in real time from xLights in a show, without some of the additional overhead that would be required to set the same thing up in the scheduler, where you'd have to create sequences because you can't just drop effects in the scheduler and so forth. So it's got its uses. I don't expect it will be used much, probably, like I said, in people that are doing live shows and the like, and would prefer to do things that way. Finally, one change to the scheduler, and there are some other changes coming, but not in this release. I have, when you edit advanced, one of the things that you can add is projectors. There used to be when you right clicked here, there was a thing called PJ Link, which you could add. I've now removed that. If you previously used the PJ Link, that's going to break and it won't load. And instead what I've got is this new one called Projector. And if you go to Projector, you'll notice that it's now aware of a whole bunch of Projector protocols. I'll freely admit, I spent a bit of time in the FPP plugin code looking at all of the protocols, etc., and largely brought them across. It still supports PJ Link. I think up the top here, PJ Link is there, so you can still use the PJ Link protocol. Just as you could before, but now the projector control also supports a whole bunch of serial protocols as well. So hopefully that will give you much greater flexibility about controlling your projectors in the scheduler. And that's it for 2018.12. A reasonably material set of changes, and we hope you enjoy it, guys. Thanks a lot.